My wife's sister lied that I forced myself on her and got her pregnant, and my wife and her family believed her instantly. My wife punched me hard, and her brothers beat me up and destroy my life. I booked a one-way ticket and vanished. Few years later, she finally tracked me down and banged on my door in desperation. You know how they say your life can change in an instant? Yeah, well, they're not kidding. 1 second you're living your best life, thinking you've got everything figured out, and the next second you're staring down the barrel of a nightmare that makes absolutely no sense. It was Tuesday morning, nothing special about it. Hell, it was actually shaping up to be a pretty decent day. The sun was doing that thing where it cuts through the kitchen window just right, hitting those white subway tiles Amira insisted we install last spring. Made the whole place look like something out of those home renovation shows she's always binge-watching. I was standing there at the counter, stirring my coffee with one of those little silver spoons she got from her grandmother, watching the cream swirl around in lazy circles. I'd just gotten back from Murphy's Market down the street. You know, the one with the overpriced organic everything that somehow makes you feel better about your life choices. Had the hazelnut creamer Amira goes crazy for tucked under one arm and a loaf of that fancy oat bread she's been obsessed with lately. The kind that costs $8, but apparently has all these magical health benefits, or whatever. I was actually feeling pretty good about myself, like husband of the year material, because I remembered both items without her having to text me a reminder list like usual. The house was quiet in that comfortable way it gets on weekday mornings. Amira had already left for her yoga class, the one she never misses, rain or shine. Our golden retriever, Chester, was sprawled out on his favorite spot by the sliding door, completely knocked out in that deep sleep dogs do so well. Everything was normal. Everything was perfect, actually. Then came the knock. Not the polite, gentle tap-tap you'd expect from the UPS guy, or maybe Mrs. Henderson from next door bringing over another casserole. This was different. Urgent. The kind of knock that makes your stomach drop before your brain even processes why. I figured it had to be Lila, Amira's little sister, showing up unannounced like she always does. That girl has zero concept of boundaries or calling ahead. She's got this habit of just appearing whenever life gets a little too complicated for her to handle alone. But when I opened that front door, something felt off immediately. The energy was all wrong, like the air before a thunderstorm. Lila was standing there on our welcome mat, the one that says "Home Sweet Home" that we bought at Target last Christmas. But she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her face was pale as printer paper, and her eyes were wide and glassy, like she'd been crying or was about to start. She had this weird, shaky energy about her that made my skin crawl. And then I saw Amira behind her. My wife was standing there on our own front porch, arms crossed tight across her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. Her lips were pressed into this thin line, trembling slightly, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pure, raw fury. The kind that burns so hot it's almost cold. She wasn't looking at Lila. She was looking directly at me, and man, if looks could kill, I would have been 6 feet under right then and there. "Julian," Lila said, and her voice was this weird combination of shaky and determined, like she'd been practicing whatever she was about to say. "We need to talk." I stepped back instinctively, my brain trying to process what the hell was happening. Chester had woken up from all the commotion and was now standing behind me, tail wagging uncertainly because he could sense the tension but didn't understand it. Dogs are smart like that. They pick up on energy way before humans do. "Okay," I said slowly, still holding the coffee mug in one hand. "What's going on?" "Amira, why do you look like?" That's when Lila dropped the bomb that would completely obliterate my entire existence. "Julian forced himself on me," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush like she'd been holding them back for weeks. "And I'm pregnant." The world stopped. I mean, literally stopped. Time froze. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, sending ceramic pieces and hot liquid everywhere. Chester jumped back with a startled bark. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I'd just heard because it was so completely, utterly, impossibly wrong that my brain refused to accept it. "What?" I managed to croak out, but before the word had even fully left my mouth, I felt the sharp sting of Amira's palm connecting with my cheek. The slap echoed through the entryway like a gunshot, and my head snapped to the side from the force of it. "No questions. No, is this true? No, let me hear your side." Nothing. Just immediate judgment and punishment based on the word of her sister. The woman I'd been married to for 4 years, the woman who claimed to love me more than anything in this world, had just decided I was guilty without even giving me a chance to defend myself. Amira, what the hell? I started, raising my hand to my burning cheek, but she was already backing away from me like I was some kind of monster. Don't, she said, her voice cold as ice. Don't you dare try to deny it. Don't you dare try to make excuses. But here's the thing that made everything 1,000 times worse. I heard heavy footsteps on the front walkway, and suddenly Dorian and Malek, Amira's 2 older brothers, came bursting through the still open door like they'd been waiting for their cue. These guys are both built like linebackers, all muscle and attitude, and they had this look in their eyes that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a surprise visit. This wasn't a coincidence. This whole thing had been planned. There he is, Dorian growled, cracking his knuckles. The piece of shit who hurt our sister. Wait, hold on, I said, raising both hands in front of me. This is insane. I never touched Lila. I would never. But Malek was already moving. He grabbed me by the shirt and shoved me backward so hard I stumbled and nearly fell. You calling our sister a liar? He snarled. I'm saying there's been a mistake. I tried to explain, but they weren't interested in listening. They were interested in revenge. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. They dragged me out of my own house, right there in broad daylight, onto the front lawn where all the neighbors could see. Mrs. Henderson was watering her petunias and dropped her hose. The college kids across the street stopped their pickup basketball game to watch. And these 2 animals proceeded to beat the living hell out of me like I was some kind of criminal. Dorian's fist connected with my ribs so hard I thought he might have cracked something. Malek got me in the stomach, doubling me over, gasping for air. They took turns, methodical and brutal, like they'd done this before. And the whole time, I kept looking toward the house, toward Amira, waiting for her to stop them, to realize this was wrong, to remember who I was. But she just stood there in the doorway, arms still crossed, watching her brothers destroy the man she'd promised to love and protect. There was no doubt in her eyes, no hesitation, no moment where she questioned whether maybe, just maybe, there had been some kind of mistake. She'd already decided I was guilty, and she was going to let me pay the price. When they were finally done with me, I was lying on my own front lawn, tasting blood, feeling like every bone in my body had been rearranged. Dorian leaned down close to my ear and whispered, "If you ever come near our family again, we'll kill you." Then they walked away, all 3 of them, leaving me there broken and bleeding while the neighbors whispered and pointed. Chester was the only one who came to check on me, whimpering and licking my face like he was trying to understand why his humans had lost their minds. That was the moment everything shattered. Not just my ribs or my pride, but my entire life, my marriage, my future, everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most in this world. You'd think after getting the beating of your life on your own front lawn, you'd fight back somehow. You'd think you'd be screaming from the rooftops about your innocence, calling lawyers, demanding proof, making a scene. But here's the thing nobody tells you about being falsely accused of something this horrible. Sometimes the shock is so complete, so overwhelming, that you just shut down entirely. I didn't defend myself. Not that day when I was lying there tasting my own blood on the grass. Not the next day when I could barely move without wincing. Not even when I realized that everyone in my life had already made up their minds about who I was and what I'd done. I just went numb, like my brain had flipped some kind of emergency switch and decided the best way to survive this nightmare was to feel absolutely nothing at all. The first thing I did was pack a bag. Just one bag. It took me about 20 minutes because every movement felt like someone was stabbing me in the ribs with a hot poker, courtesy of Dorian's enthusiastic punching session. I grabbed some clothes, my laptop, my phone charger, and my wallet. That was it. Everything else, all the stuff that made up the life of Julian Rhodes, I left behind like it belonged to someone else. Walking through that house was surreal as hell. There were our wedding photos on the mantle, both of us grinning like idiots on the beach in Cabo. There was the stupid throw pillow Amira bought that said, "Home is where the heart is," in fancy script. There was Chester's leash hanging by the door, and his food bowl still sitting on the kitchen mat. There was my wedding ring on the bathroom sink, where I'd left it after washing my hands that morning, back when I was still a husband instead of a monster. I didn't take any of it. What was the point? That life was over. Julian Rhodes, the guy who remembered to buy hazelnut creamer and worried about whether the lawn needed mowing, was apparently a rapist now. And you can't pack up a life built on lies, can you? The Riverside Inn is this rundown motel on the outskirts of town that mostly caters to truckers and people who've made some seriously questionable life choices. It smells like cigarettes and industrial-strength air freshener, and the carpet has stains that probably have their own zip codes. But it was cheap, it was anonymous, and most importantly, it was nowhere near the house where my wife had watched her brothers beat me half to death. I paid for a week up front in cash and spent the first 2 days just lying on the scratchy comforter, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked kind of like a sad face. My ribs hurt so bad I could barely breathe properly, and every time I shifted positions, I'd see stars. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental stuff. My brain kept replaying that moment over and over. Lila's words, Amira's slap, the look in her eyes when she decided I was guilty. By day 2, things got worse. My phone started buzzing with a call from my boss, David Martinez, the guy who'd hired me straight out of college and had been nothing but supportive for the past 6 years. I let it go to voicemail, but I knew what it was going to say before I even listened to it. Julian, hey, it's David. Look, I need you to stay home for a few days while we sort some things out. There are some allegations that have come to our attention, and HR needs to conduct an investigation. Don't come in until you hear from us, okay? I'm sorry, man. I really hope this gets cleared up soon. Suspended pending investigation. Just like that. No questions about my side of the story. No presumption of innocence. No. Hey, this seems completely out of character for you. What's really going on here? Just immediate damage control because having an accused rapist on the payroll is bad for business. But the real kick in the teeth came when I finally worked up the courage to check social media. Lila hadn't posted anything specific. She was too smart for that. Probably had a lawyer tell her to keep her mouth shut about details. But she'd shared some generic post about finding the strength to speak your truth and supporting survivors, and anyone with half a brain who knew our families could connect the dots. The comments section was a dumpster fire. People I hadn't talked to since high school were calling me a predator. Former co-workers were expressing their shock and disgust. Some random woman I'd never met in my life posted a 3-paragraph rant about how men like me were the reason women couldn't feel safe anywhere. My phone was blowing up with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters or just random people who'd gotten hold of my contact info somehow. The voicemails were brutal. Some were from journalists wanting my side of the story. Others were from complete strangers calling me every name in the book. One woman left a 5-minute message detailing exactly what she thought should happen to me in prison. But you know what the worst part was? The silence from the people who mattered. My phone was full of missed calls from strangers wanting to destroy me, but not a single one from Amira. Not one text asking if I was okay, or if maybe there'd been some kind of mistake, or even just telling me to stay away. Nothing. Radio silence from the woman who'd shared my bed for 4 years, who'd promised to stand by me through everything, who'd said she'd love me no matter what. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in her world now. I wasn't her husband anymore. I wasn't even human anymore. I was just a problem that needed to be erased, and she was doing her part by pretending I'd never existed at all. You know what's funny about rock bottom? It's not the dramatic crash you see in movies where everything explodes at once. It's more like slowly sinking into quicksand. Each day you're just a little deeper, a little more trapped, until you realize you can't even see the surface anymore. That's where I was sitting in that crappy motel room on day 3, staring at my laptop screen and Googling places to disappear like some kind of fugitive. I'd already blown through half my savings just existing for 72 hours. The motel was cheap, but it wasn't free, and my credit cards felt like ticking time bombs. Every swipe could potentially be tracked, could lead someone back to me, could give the media or the internet mob or whoever else wanted a piece of me a way to find where I was hiding. I needed to get gone, and I needed to do it fast. The Greyhound station downtown looked exactly like you'd expect. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look like extras from a zombie movie, plastic chairs that had seen better decades, and that distinctive smell of industrial cleaner mixed with human desperation. I bought a ticket to the first coastal town on the departure board whose name I couldn't even pronounce properly. Some place called Millhaven up in Maine, about as far from my old life as I could get without leaving the country entirely. The guy behind the counter was this older dude with tired eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that looked more like a 3-day shadow. He barely glanced at my driver's license when I bought the ticket, just scanned it, and handed me the receipt with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. Perfect. The less memorable I was, the better. I paid cash for everything. The ticket, the overpriced sandwich from the vending machine, the bottle of water that cost more than a decent meal should. My wallet was getting thinner by the hour, but paper money couldn't be traced the way cards could. I was thinking like a criminal now, which I guess made sense since everyone already thought I was one. The bus ride took 14 hours, and let me tell you, it was 14 hours of pure psychological torture. Every time we stopped, I half expected to see police cars or reporters, or maybe even Dorian and Malek waiting to finish what they'd started. Every passenger who got on made me paranoid that they might recognize me from whatever news coverage this whole nightmare had generated. I kept my hood up and my head down, pretending to sleep while my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. But somewhere around hour 10, when we were cruising through some nameless stretch of New Hampshire forest, something weird happened. I started to feel like I could breathe again. Not much, just a little, but it was the first time since this whole thing started that my chest didn't feel like it was being crushed by an invisible weight. Maybe it was the distance, or maybe it was just the rhythm of the road, but for the first time in days, I wasn't thinking about Lila's lie or Amira's slap or the sound my ribs made when Dorian's fist connected. When we finally rolled into Millhaven, it was like stepping into a completely different world. This wasn't some tourist trap with fancy seafood restaurants and boutique shops. This was a working town, the kind of place where people minded their own business because they had enough problems of their own to worry about. The buildings were weathered and practical, the harbor was full of actual fishing boats instead of pleasure crafts, and everyone I saw looked like they'd earned their living with their hands. I found a room to rent from this classified ad posted on a bulletin board at the general store. It was in the back of a house owned by an old woman named Mrs. Kowalski who asked exactly 2 questions. You got first month's rent? And you gonna cause trouble? When I answered yes to the first and no to the second, she handed me a key and told me the Wi-Fi password. That was it. No background check, no references, no long conversation about my life story. Just business. The room was small and simple. A bed, a dresser, a desk, and a window that looked out over the harbor. It smelled like old wood and sea salt, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear Mrs. Kowalski's TV through the floor. But it was clean, it was private, and most importantly, it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was living somewhere that had absolutely no connection to my past. That's when I made the decision that would define the next chapter of my existence. I was standing at that window, watching fishing boats come in with the evening tide, when I saw a keychain in the general store window that just said Mason in simple block letters. I don't know why, but something about that name felt right. It was solid, unpretentious, the kind of name that belonged to someone who worked with his hands and didn't complicate things. Julian Rhodes was a guy who got accused of rape and had his life destroyed. But Mason? Mason was nobody yet. Mason had no history, no baggage, no wife who'd watched her brothers beat him bloody. Mason was a clean slate, and for the first time since this nightmare began, that felt like exactly what I needed to be. Time moves differently when you're nobody. I'm not talking about some philosophical bullshit here. I mean, it literally moves different. When you don't have meetings to attend or people expecting you to be somewhere, when your phone isn't buzzing with notifications and your calendar isn't color-coded with obligations. I'd been Mason for about 3 weeks when I met Eli down at the harbor. This old guy, maybe 70-something, with hands like leather and a voice that sounded like he'd been gargling gravel for decades. He was standing next to this beat-up fishing boat called Second Chance, trying to untangle what looked like about a mile of nets that had gotten twisted up in some kind of nightmare knot situation. You know anything about knots, son? He asked when he saw me watching from the dock. I shrugged. A little. Which was true. Julian Rhodes had been pretty decent with knots back in his Boy Scout days, but that felt like another lifetime now. Need some help then? Eli said, not really asking. These nets ain't gonna fix themselves, and my arthritis is acting up something fierce. That's how I ended up spending my first real day as Mason knee-deep in fishing gear, learning the difference between a bowline and a clove hitch all over again. Eli paid me $50 cash and asked if I wanted to come back tomorrow. I said yes without even thinking about it. It felt good to have something to do with my hands, something that had nothing to do with computers or meetings or any of the stuff that used to define my existence. Eli became my first real connection in Millhaven. He didn't ask a lot of questions, which I appreciated more than he probably knew. He'd just show up every morning around 6, hand me a thermos of coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead, and put me to work on whatever needed doing. Some days it was nets, other days it was scraping barnacles off the hull or fixing the engine or hauling gear around the dock. The work was hard as hell. My back ached constantly for the first month, and my hands were covered in cuts and calluses that made typing on my laptop feel weird. But there was something satisfying about it, something pure. When you spend 8 hours fixing a net, at the end of the day you've got a net that works. It's simple math, no politics or office drama or performance reviews. Just honest work for honest pay. After a couple of months, word got around that the new guy, Mason, was pretty handy with tools and didn't mind getting dirty. Mrs. Patterson needed help fixing her dock after a storm wrecked half the support posts. Jimmy Castellanos wanted someone to re-shingle his roof before winter hit. Sarah Chun had a fence that was falling apart and needed to be rebuilt from scratch. I said yes to all of it, partly because I needed the money. My savings were disappearing faster than I'd hoped, but mostly because staying busy kept my head quiet. When you're focused on whether a board is level or if you've got enough shingles to finish a section, you don't have time to think about the life you left behind or wonder if your wife ever thinks about you or imagine what people are saying about you back home. That's when I started getting into the website stuff. Sarah Chun owned this little flower shop called Bloom and Grow, and she mentioned one day that she'd been wanting to set up online ordering but had no clue how to make it happen. Her current website looked like something from 1995, just a basic page with her address and phone number. I could help you with that, I said, surprising myself. I hadn't touched any serious web design since getting suspended from my old job, but it's not like you forget how to code overnight. Sarah's eyes lit up. Really? How much would something like that cost? I threw out a number that was probably way too low, $300 for a complete redesign with e-commerce capability. But I wasn't trying to get rich here. I just wanted something to do in the evenings when the physical work was done and my brain started wandering into dangerous territory. Building Sarah's website felt like putting on an old, comfortable shirt. My fingers remembered the keyboard shortcuts, the logic of clean code, the satisfaction of solving problems one function at a time. But it was different now, simpler somehow. I wasn't trying to impress anyone or climb any corporate ladders. I was just making something that worked for someone who needed it. When I launched the site, Sarah was so excited she literally squealed. "Mason, this is incredible. It looks so professional." She paid me in cash and immediately started telling everyone she knew about the guy who could build websites. That led to more requests. The hardware store wanted to modernize their inventory system. The local diner needed a website that could handle online reservations. Even the town's small law office wanted help setting up a digital filing system. I started a little side business under the name M. Reeves Design, using my new identity and my mother's maiden name, just to be safe. I bought a used laptop from the pawn shop and a spiral notebook where I sketched out designs and wrote reminders to myself. Simple stuff, nothing fancy, but it worked. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I was building something again instead of just surviving. I had a routine, I had work that mattered to people, and I had a name that didn't make me flinch when someone said it out loud. Mason Reeves was becoming real, one website and one fixed dock at a time. 3 years. That's how long I'd been Mason Reeves, living in this little coastal town where nobody gave a damn about my past because everyone was too busy dealing with their own present. 3 years of fixing boats and building websites, of Mrs. Kowalski's terrible coffee and Eli's stories about the old days. 3 years of peace, or at least something close enough to peace that I'd started sleeping through the night again. My life had fallen into this comfortable rhythm that I never thought I'd have again. Mornings started with physical work, helping Eli with whatever boat needed attention, or maybe fixing someone's deck, or replacing shingles that got torn off in the latest storm. Afternoons were for the tech stuff, sitting in my little room with my laptop, building websites for local businesses who were finally catching up to the digital age. Evenings I'd walk down to Murphy's Tavern, grab a beer and a burger, maybe catch a Red Sox game on the ancient TV above the bar. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. Mason's life was simple and honest and predictable in all the best ways. No drama, no expectations, no landmines waiting to explode the moment I let my guard down. I'd even started dating a little. Nothing serious, just coffee with Linda, who worked at the library, or dinner with Rebecca from the hardware store. Nice women who knew me as the quiet guy who fixed things and didn't ask too many questions about where I came from. But the thing about running from your past is that eventually, it catches up with you anyway. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed again. The storm had been building all day. One of those nasty nor'easters that roll in off the Atlantic and try to rearrange the coastline. By 8 o'clock, the wind was howling like something out of a horror movie, and the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like machine gun fire against my window. I was working on a website for the new bakery that had opened up on Main Street, trying to figure out how to make their online ordering system integrate with their point-of-sale software, when I heard it. That sound that made my blood freeze in my veins because I'd heard it before, in another life, in another world. Knock, knock, knock. Not the gentle tap of Mrs. Kowalski checking to see if I needed anything. Not the confident bang of Eli coming to tell me we had emergency boat repairs to handle. This was desperate, panicked. The kind of knock that said whoever was on the other side of that door was at the absolute end of their rope. I closed my laptop and sat perfectly still for a moment, hoping maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a tree branch hitting the side of the house, or debris flying around in the storm. But then it came again, more insistent this time, and I heard something that made my heart stop completely. "Julian, please, it's me." That voice. Jesus Christ, that voice. I hadn't heard it in 3 years, but I would have recognized it anywhere, even distorted by wind and rain and whatever desperation had driven her to my door in the middle of a storm. Amira, my wife, my ex-wife, the woman who'd watched her brothers beat me bloody and then erased me from her life like I'd never existed. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 seconds, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. How had she found me? What did she want? Was this some kind of setup? Were Dorian and Malak waiting in the shadows, ready to finish what they'd started? But then she spoke again, and there was something in her voice that cut through all my paranoia and fear. "Please, Julian. I know you're in there. I can see the light under the door." She sounded broken. Not angry, not accusatory, not like the woman who'd slapped me across the face 3 years ago. Just broken, like someone who'd been carrying a weight so heavy it had finally crushed something inside her. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of concrete. Every step toward that door felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. This was it. The moment when Mason Reeves's carefully constructed life either survived or got blown apart all over again. I opened the door slowly, just a crack at first, and there she was. Amira, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her head, her clothes clinging to her shivering body. But it was her eyes that hit me the hardest. They were hollow, red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks, maybe months. She looked like a ghost of the woman I'd once loved more than anything in the world. "Hi," she said quietly, and her voice was barely audible over the storm. I didn't invite her in. I didn't say anything at all. Instead, I walked over to my desk, opened the drawer where I kept my most important possessions, and pulled out a small USB drive. The one I'd taped to the back of my notebook 3 years ago and hadn't looked at since. The one containing the only evidence I had that might prove my innocence. I walked back to the door and held it out to her. "Play this," I said, my voice sounding strange and rusty from the shock of using my real name again. "Come back tomorrow, if you still want to talk." She took the drive with trembling fingers, staring at it like it might explode. "Julian, tomorrow," I said, and closed the door. I spent that night sitting by my window, watching the storm tear apart the harbor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. After 3 years of peace, the past had finally caught up with me, and I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I didn't sleep, not even a little bit. I just sat in that chair by the window, watching the storm slowly exhaust itself against the harbor, replaying every second of seeing Amira at my door. By morning, the wind had died down to occasional gusts, and the rain had turned into that light drizzle that makes everything look gray and washed out. Perfect weather for the conversation I was about to have. She showed up at exactly 9 o'clock, like she'd been waiting somewhere nearby for what she thought was an appropriate time to knock on someone's door. This time when I opened it, she looked different, still hollow, still broken, but there was something else in her eyes now. Knowledge. The kind of heavy, terrible knowledge that changes everything you thought you knew about the world. I listened, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and stepped aside to let her in. I know. She walked into my little room like she was in a museum, looking around at the simple furniture, the laptop on the desk, the fishing gear in the corner that Eli had lent me. Everything about this place screamed ordinary, working class, nothing like the life we'd built together back when we were Julian and Amira Rhodes, when we thought we had everything figured out. This is where you've been living? She asked, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Not judgment, exactly. Maybe just sadness. It's home, I said, which surprised me because I hadn't realized that's how I felt about this place until the words came out of my mouth. She sat down on the edge of my bed, the only other place to sit besides my desk chair, and put her face in her hands. Her shoulders started shaking, and I realized she was crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears she'd shed sometimes during our marriage when we'd fight about stupid stuff like whose turn it was to do the dishes. These were the deep, body-wrecking sobs of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. I destroyed you, she whispered through her fingers. I stayed standing by the window, keeping distance between us. Physical and emotional. Yeah, I said. You did. Why didn't you tell me about the recording? She asked, finally looking up at me with those red, swollen eyes. I stared out at the harbor, watching the fishing boats head out for their morning runs. Eli's boat was among them. He'd probably been wondering where I was, since I usually helped him prep the nets before he went out. But this conversation was more important than nets, even if I wished it wasn't happening at all. Because it wouldn't have changed what you did, I said finally. You didn't ask me once. You didn't say, Julian, is this true? Or Julian, what happened? Or even Julian, I need to hear your side of this. You just slapped me and watched them beat me. She flinched like I'd hit her. I was so angry. You were so ready to believe the worst about me. I corrected. Your sister said I raped her, and you didn't even hesitate. Not for 1 second. That tells me everything I need to know about what you really thought of me, deep down. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I turned to look at her then, really look at her. Amira, we were married for 4 years. 4 years of sleeping in the same bed, sharing meals, talking about having kids someday, planning our future together. And when the moment came where you had to choose between believing your husband or believing an accusation with no proof, you chose the accusation. In about 2 seconds flat. She was quiet for a long time, just sitting there staring at her hands. Finally, she said, do you hate me? That question hung in the air between us like smoke. I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I hate her? 3 years ago, absolutely. 3 years ago, I would have burned down half of Massachusetts just to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But now? No, I said, and meant it. Hate takes energy, and I don't have any left for you. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually recoiled, pressing her back against the wall. That's worse, she said. That's so much worse than hate. Maybe, I said, but it's honest. She stood up then, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I came here to apologize, to try to make things right somehow. There's no making this right, I told her. There's no going back to who we were. Julian and Amira Rhodes are dead, Amira. You killed them 3 years ago when you decided I was a monster without giving me a chance to prove I wasn't. So what now, she asked. I shrugged. Now you go back to your life, and I keep living mine. Simple as that. What if I don't want to go back? She said quietly. What if I want to stay here, try to earn your forgiveness somehow? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once been the center of my universe, who had promised to love me through everything, who had thrown me away the moment it became inconvenient to believe in me. You can't earn something that doesn't exist, I said. I don't forgive you, Amira. I don't hate you either, but I sure as hell don't forgive you. What you did to me, watching me get beaten, letting everyone believe I was a rapist, never once questioning whether maybe you'd made a mistake, that broke something in me that can't be fixed. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer but hoped for a different one. I understand, she said. Do you? I asked. Because understanding and accepting are 2 different things. She walked toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the knob. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my entire life." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't bring back the dead." You know what's funny about the internet? It's got the attention span of a goldfish and the memory of an elephant, all at the same time. 3 years ago, I was the villain in everyone's favorite outrage story. 3 years ago, people who'd never met me were calling for my head on social media. But apparently, all it takes is one little audio file to flip the script completely. I found out about it from Eli, of all people. I was down at the harbor helping him repair some storm damage from the nor'easter when his grandson Tommy came running down the dock with his phone in his hand, looking like he'd just witnessed a miracle or maybe the apocalypse. "Gramps, you gotta see this," Tommy said, breathing hard from running. "That story about the guy who got falsely accused? It's everywhere. Someone posted proof that the sister was lying the whole time." Eli looked at me with those sharp old eyes of his. He'd never asked about my past, but I had a feeling he'd figured out more than he let on. Small towns are like that. People notice things, even when they're polite enough not to mention them. "That's so," Eli said casually, but he was watching my face. Tommy was already pulling up whatever he'd found on his phone. "Yeah, look at this. Someone posted this anonymous thing with an audio recording of the sister admitting she made the whole thing up. She's laughing about it, talking about how she hated how perfect everyone thought Julian was. It's brutal, man. The internet is losing its mind." My hands went numb. Just completely numb, like all the blood had drained out of them. After 3 years of silence, after building this whole new life as Mason, the truth was finally coming out. And I had no idea how to feel about it. "Let me see that," Eli said, taking the phone from his grandson. He listened for about 30 seconds, then handed it back. "Well, I'll be damned. Poor bastard. The crazy part is how fast it's spreading," Tommy continued, completely oblivious to the fact that he was talking about my life. "It's already got like 500,000 views, and people are sharing it everywhere. The hashtag Justice for Julian is trending. Everyone's trying to figure out who he is and where he went." I excused myself and walked to the end of the dock, pretending to check on some equipment, but really just trying to process what I'd just heard. Someone had posted the recording. Not me. I'd given it to Amira, and she was the only other person who had access to it, which meant she'd decided to go public with the truth. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as the story exploded across every social media platform you could name. The anonymous post was detailed and devastating, laying out the whole timeline: Lila's false accusation, my beating, the suspension from work, the way I'd disappeared from my old life. Someone had done their homework, because they'd even included screenshots of some of the original social media posts calling me a monster, showing just how quickly everyone had been willing to destroy me based on nothing but an. The audio recording was the smoking gun, though. Lila's voice, clear as day, laughing about how she'd made it up because she hated how perfect everyone thought Julian was. She talked about being jealous of my relationship with Amira, about wanting to see what would happen if she knocked him down a few pegs. It was sickening to listen to, but it was also vindication in its purest form. The internet's response was swift and merciless. Lila got doxxed within 48 hours. Her law firm fired her immediately after the recording went viral, citing conduct incompatible with our firm's values. The partners released a statement saying they were horrified to learn that one of their associates had engaged in such reprehensible behavior. Her social media accounts got flooded with thousands of comments calling her every name in the book, and she ended up deactivating everything and basically disappearing from public view. Malek lost his contractor's license after someone dug up security footage from a neighbor's camera showing him and Dorian beating me on my own front lawn. The video was grainy and the audio was terrible, but you could clearly see two grown men attacking someone who wasn't fighting back. The state licensing board called it conduct unbecoming of a licensed professional and revoked his credentials permanently. Dorian had it even worse. As a high school football coach, he was supposed to be a role model for kids. When the video of him participating in what the local news called a vigilante attack went public, the school district didn't even wait for an investigation. They fired him the same day, and the story made headlines in the education section of every major newspaper in the state. Coach fired for assault, was trending on Twitter for 3 days straight. But the person who really got destroyed was Amira's mother, Sahar. Someone had screenshotted her early social media posts from 3 years ago, including one particularly damning comment where she'd written, "Some men hide evil behind charm. Thank God the truth came out before he could hurt anyone else." The irony was brutal, and the internet wasn't about to let her forget it. Sahar had been on the board of directors for a women's shelter, a position she'd held for over a decade and was genuinely proud of. When the screenshots started circulating, showing how quickly she'd been willing to condemn an innocent man, the other board members asked for her resignation. The shelter released a statement saying they could not maintain confidence in someone who had rushed to judgment without evidence. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't post anything, didn't give any interviews, didn't try to capitalize on my newfound vindication. I just kept being Mason, fixing boats and building websites, watching from the sidelines as the world finally learned what I'd known all along. The truth was out there now, spreading faster than the original lie ever had. But you know what? It didn't feel like victory. It just felt like justice, cold and inevitable, and 3 years too late. The weird thing about living in a small town is that you can't really hide from anyone, even when you want to. After the story went viral and half the internet was playing detective trying to figure out where Julian Rhodes had disappeared to, I kept expecting reporters or internet sleuths to show up at my door. But somehow, Millhaven stayed off their radar. Maybe it was because I'd been using the name Mason for 3 years, or maybe it was just because this place was so far off the beaten path that even Google Maps seemed to forget it existed sometimes. What I didn't expect was for Amira to stick around. I first noticed her about 2 weeks after our conversation, when I was walking back from Eli's boat and saw a woman with dark hair coming out of the real estate office on Main Street. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, nothing fancy, but something about the way she carried herself made me look twice. That's when I realized it was her. She'd rented a studio apartment above Henderson's Bakery, right in the heart of downtown, where everyone could see her coming and going. It was the kind of place you'd choose if you wanted to blend in with the locals, not if you were trying to hide from the media circus that was still swirling around our story. At first, I thought maybe she was just staying a few days to get her head straight before going back to her real life. But days turned into weeks, and she was still there. I'd see her at Murphy's Market buying groceries, always paying cash, always keeping her head down, but not in a sneaky way. More like someone who was trying to be respectful of other people's space. The first time I saw her volunteering at the free clinic, I thought I was hallucinating. This was the same woman who used to complain about having to attend charity galas because they were so depressing. And now she was sorting medical supplies for people who couldn't afford to see a real doctor. She was wearing scrubs that were too big for her and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the polished, put-together Amira I'd been married to. "That's the new girl," Linda from the library told me when I mentioned seeing someone new at the clinic. We were having coffee at Murphy's Tavern, and Linda loved being the unofficial town gossip dispatcher. "Goes by Amy now. Real quiet. Keeps to herself mostly. But she's been helping out all over town. The clinic, the food bank. Even stayed late after that storm last week to help clean up debris from the elementary school playground." Amy. She'd reinvented herself too, just like I had. The difference was, she was doing it in full view of everyone, while I'd run away and hidden for 3 years. I started noticing her everywhere after that, helping Mrs. Chun load heavy bags of mulch into her truck, staying after closing time at the animal shelter to walk dogs that hadn't gotten enough exercise during the day, sitting with old Mr. Patterson on his porch when his daughter couldn't visit, just keeping him company while he rambled about the weather and his late wife. She never looked entitled anymore. That's what struck me the most. The Amira I'd married had this way of moving through the world like she expected it to accommodate her, like she deserved good things just by virtue of existing. This woman, Amy, moved like someone who was grateful for every small kindness, who understood that respect had to be earned. One evening in late November, I was sitting on the pier watching the sunset when she appeared beside me. Not close enough to invade my space, but close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Something different from what she used to use, something simpler. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at me. "For what?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "For not exposing me when you could have." She was staring out at the water, watching a lone seagull dive for fish. When the story went viral, you could have told everyone that I was the one who posted the recording. You could have made me part of the story, made sure I got dragged through the mud with everyone else. But you didn't. I shrugged. I didn't do it for you. I did it because dragging you down wouldn't have brought me up. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer. Still, thank you. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the harbor lights start to flicker on as darkness settled over the water. It was weird, sitting next to someone who had once been the most important person in my world and feeling nothing. Not love, not hate, not even curiosity about what she was thinking. Just this neutral acknowledgement that we were two people who used to know each other. Are you happy here? She asked eventually. I thought about it. Happy seemed like too strong a word. I'm at peace, I said finally. Good, she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like genuine relief. You deserve that. She stood up then, brushing invisible dust off her jeans. I won't bother you again, she said. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I took from you, what I destroyed. I can't fix it, but I understand it. I watched her walk away, her figure getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared around the corner onto Main Street. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises to stay in touch or pretend that we could ever be friends. We just acknowledged what we were now, two strangers who had once shared a life that no longer existed. And somehow, that felt right. Like we'd finally found the ending our story was supposed to have. Life has this funny way of moving forward whether you're ready for it or not. After that conversation on the pier with Amira, Amy, whatever she wanted to call herself now, I thought I might feel different somehow. Like having that final closure would change something fundamental about how I moved through the world. But the next morning, I woke up at the same time, made the same terrible instant coffee, and headed down to help Eli with the same nets that always seemed to need fixing. The only difference was that I stopped looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My business was growing faster than I'd ever expected it to. What had started as a side hustle building simple websites had turned into something real, something that mattered. Word travels fast in small communities, and apparently word had traveled all the way to Portland and even Boston that there was this guy in Millhaven who could solve your tech problems without charging you an arm and a leg or talking down to you like you were an idiot. I hired Jake Morrison first. This 22-year-old kid who dropped out of community college because he couldn't afford the tuition but knew more about coding than most people with computer science degrees. He showed up to the interview wearing a Metallica t-shirt and boots that had seen better days, but when I gave him a test project, he knocked it out of the park in half the time I would have taken. You sure you want to work for a small operation like this? I asked him. You could probably get hired at some big tech company, make 3 times what I can pay you. Jake laughed. Dude, have you seen what those places are like? All corporate politics and meetings about meetings. I'd rather work on stuff that actually matters to real people. 6 months later, I hired Sarah Kim, a recent graduate from UMaine who specialized in user experience design. She was the opposite of Jake in every way, organized where he was chaotic, methodical where he was instinctive, but somehow they worked together like they'd been coding as a team for years. We moved out of my little room above Mrs. Kowalski's place and into a real office space above the hardware store. Nothing fancy, just 3 desks, a couple of whiteboards, and a coffee maker that actually produced something drinkable. But it felt legitimate in a way that surprised me. Reeves Design wasn't just Mason's side project anymore. It was a real business with real employees and real responsibility. The day I bought the building was probably the proudest moment of my new life. It was this old brick structure right on Main Street that had been empty for 2 years because the previous owner couldn't find anyone willing to take on the renovations it needed. The roof leaked, the electrical system was from the Eisenhower administration, and the plumbing made sounds like a dying whale. But it had good bones and huge windows that looked out over the harbor. You sure about this, boss? Jake asked as we stood in what would become our main workspace, listening to water drip into strategically placed buckets. Nope, I said, but I'm sure about what it could be. It took us 4 months to make the place habitable, working evenings and weekends while still keeping up with our client work. Eli helped with the heavier construction stuff, teaching me more about carpentry than I'd ever thought I'd need to know. Even Mrs. Kowalski showed up one Saturday with sandwiches and unsolicited advice about paint colors. The day we removed the last bucket and turned on the lights in our fully renovated office, Sarah actually started crying. This is so cool, she said, wiping her eyes. We built this. Like, literally built it. That's when I knew we'd turned a corner. This wasn't just about surviving anymore, or hiding from my past, or proving that Mason Reeves could exist independently of Julian Rhodes. This was about creating something meaningful, something that would outlast whatever personal drama had brought me here in the first place. Professor Williams from the community college reached out in the spring, asking if I'd be willing to give a talk to her entrepreneurship class about building a business from scratch. The students would really benefit from hearing your story, she said. Starting over, finding your niche, building something sustainable in a small market. I agreed, though I was nervous as hell about standing in front of a room full of people and talking about myself. When the day came, I kept it simple, talked about the importance of solving real problems for real people, about how sometimes the best opportunities come from the places where you least expect to find them, about the value of honest work and treating your employees like human beings instead of resources. I never mentioned the lie that had driven me here. I didn't need to. The work spoke louder than any sob story ever could. After the talk, this kid who couldn't have been more than 19 came up to me with a sketchpad under his arm. Are you the guy from that story that went viral? He asked, and my stomach dropped. But then he showed me what he'd drawn while I was speaking. A simple sketch of a man standing firm against storm clouds, with the words, "Truth doesn't flinch," written underneath in block letters. I smiled. That was the first time anyone had recognized me from the story, and instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, I felt proud. Not of what had happened to me, but of what I'd done with it. Because this story, my story, wasn't about revenge or vindication or getting even with the people who'd wronged me. It was about survival and growth, and the kind of healing that happens when you stop waiting for other people to fix what they broke and start building something new instead. 5 years. That's how long it took for me to become comfortable being Julian Rhodes again. Not because anyone forced me to, not because the internet had vindicated me or because the truth had finally come out. I reclaimed my name because I'd finally become someone worthy of carrying it. It started small, the way most important changes do. Jake was working on a client proposal and asked what name he should put on the contract. For 3 years, everything had been under M. Reeves Design, but we'd outgrown that identity. We weren't just Mason's little side business anymore. We were a legitimate company with 8 employees, clients in 4 states, and a reputation for solving problems that other firms couldn't handle. Use Julian Rhodes, I said, surprising myself with how natural it sounded. Jake looked up from his laptop. You sure, boss? I thought you liked keeping things low-key. I'm not hiding anymore, I said, and realized I meant it completely. The funny thing was, nobody cared. Our clients didn't give a damn what my name was as long as we delivered good work on time and under budget. The local business community had watched me build something real over the past 5 years, had seen me employ their kids and contribute to their town's economy. They knew me by my actions, not by whatever drama had brought me here in the first place. That summer, I got a call from David Martinez, my old boss, the one who'd suspended me, pending investigation, all those years ago. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name on my phone, but curiosity got the better of me. Julian, he said, and his voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered. I've been trying to track you down for months. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, I said, which was true. David had been protecting his company, doing what he thought was right with the information he had. I couldn't fault him for that. The hell I don't, he said. I threw you under the bus without even giving you a chance to defend yourself. When that recording came out, when we all learned what really happened, Christ, Julian, I felt sick for weeks. He offered me my old job back, with a promotion and a substantial raise. We could really use someone with your skills, he said. And honestly, the company's never been the same since you left. I thanked him and told him I'd think about it, but we both knew I wasn't going back. Julian Rhodes wasn't the same guy who'd left that office 5 years ago. He'd been broken and rebuilt from the ground up, and the life he'd constructed in Millhaven wasn't something he was willing to abandon for the promise of returning to what used to be. The moment I knew I'd truly healed came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was working late in the office, trying to debug some particularly stubborn code, when this teenager walked in. Couldn't have been more than 17, all gangly limbs and nervous energy, clutching a worn sketch pad against his chest like it was made of gold. Excuse me, he said, voice cracking slightly. Are you Julian Rhodes? My first instinct was to tense up, to wonder what this kid wanted, whether he was going to ask uncomfortable questions about my past or treat me like some kind of curiosity. But when I looked at his face, I saw something unexpected: respect, maybe even admiration. Yeah, I said, that's me. He opened his sketchpad and showed me what he'd been working on, a detailed drawing of a man standing on a rocky coastline, waves crashing around him, but his feet planted firmly on solid ground. At the bottom, in careful lettering, he'd written, "Truth doesn't flinch." "I'm Marcus," he said. "I've been following your story, man. Not the internet drama bullshit, but the real story. How you built something from nothing. How you didn't let them destroy you even when everyone believed the worst." He flipped through more pages, sketches of small towns, fishing boats, people working with their hands, building things that mattered. "I want to be an artist," he said. "But my parents think it's a waste of time, that I should study something practical. When I read about how you started over, how you found a way to make a living doing something you were good at, it gave me hope, you know." I looked at this kid, this young man who saw my story not as a tragedy or a cautionary tale, but as proof that it was possible to rebuild your life on your own terms. And I realized that's exactly what it had become. "You're talented," I told him, meaning it. "Don't let anyone convince you that following your passion is a waste of time. But also don't be afraid to learn practical skills along the way. You'd be surprised how often they complement each other." After he left, I sat in my office looking out at the harbor as the sun set behind the fishing boats. This view had become as familiar to me as breathing, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like home in a way that had nothing to do with running away and everything to do with choosing to stay. My name is Julian Rhodes. I was accused, broken, erased from my own life by people who should have known better. But I didn't stay buried. I rebuilt myself under another name, in another place, and when I was ready, when I was strong enough, I took back what was mine. I live now not for their apologies, but for the man I became in spite of them. And that man, he's someone I'm proud to be.